me, how can I help?
So I think, as we discussed yesterday, that I am really looking forward to finding a new tutor that will kind of, help me strengthen or work on my weaknesses that, my previous tutor that I've worked with for almost a year wasn't able to help with those things. And I've been looking tutors around here and there, and I feel that I came across your course, and I feel that the sort of not only the guidance you provide with the course, but also the moral support, or the seeing you as a mentor, that is not only because I feel that moral support is, or any sort of support in general, is really, really essential to getting a higher score on this test. And I do, I went over the course. So moving on from there, I want you to kind of test me where with my skills, how far I am into the game, and what do you think what sort of course do you think that you offer would be the one that's suitable for me, for my condition, where I am in the process. Also a couple of other questions in terms of like the LSAT itself, like for example, when I was doing the games on the exam, I realized that on the practice test, I was able to make the deductions, but I don't really go deep into the deductions on the logic games. But when I was actually taking the exam, I barely made any deductions. So what I did was I followed the whatever the rules were, and I jot them. For sequencing, the rule is that my instructor have taught me is that you want to focus on the first and the last letter on the base, right? And make deductions there, and that's for sequencing games, and that's what I did. And if there were any sort of deduction that was apparent to me at the moment, I made those deductions. But other than that, the deep ones that you really have to, I think there was a really big inference for the last game that I missed out on completely. So I am not really good with deductions on the games, but I am able to finish the game without the deductions. But I think that, I don't know, and I'm also able to get the questions right as well. But I think it's just that I am not able to. Given that I have 53 minutes, I think even without the deduction, I should be able to finish the games. But my trouble with the games is that, like on the January exam, the fourth game was very different. I literally had no idea how am I supposed to, the first three games, I was able to get them done in like 30 minutes, let's say max 30 minutes. But the fourth game, I was like, I have no idea how to even do this. I couldn't even attempt to, finish it. So I just guessed on that game. So so my trouble, I guess, with the games would be that I don't have any idea if there's a new game that's a totally new game that I have no idea with, that I have never tried before. I don't know how to do it. Basically, I'm not like the one who's more creative and go out. And so that's the trouble I have with games, I guess. With reading calm, my instructor told me to go with speed reading, basically. I am able to finish with speed reading, but I think it's just that, like, I don't know. I think I can still improve. I don't know how to improve on the reading calm, but I feel that it's the section that I'm missing, like minus 10 questions, and I want to know why am I missing, what is it that I'm doing that's the wrong way. I know I'm doing speed reading, but I also want someone to like help me kind of like sit down and where the hell am I going wrong? Where's the thinking process that's different or that is wrong, that's not helping me improve? With LR, I feel that I really, really need help with flaw questions and also missing assumption. My instructor taught me the technique for missing assumption is that you want to basically negate the answer choices, and if it goes back and attack. But I use that, but I have no idea, but it doesn't work out for me. I negate it and I go back, like the logical opposite, I find it. Sometimes I'm not able to find even the logical opposite. So if I end up finding it, I go back and negate it, I can't really seem to how. So I need help with that, definitely, and flaw questions. Here's my story. Yeah.
Sure. All right. Well, there's a lot to unpack here, certainly more than we can cover in one conversation, but we'll try to hit on the major points in each area and see how I can help you out there. Now, you mentioned spotting errors and gaps in your thinking. That was the first thing you mentioned. Maybe there are some misconceptions you suffer from, and if we could figure out what those were, you could make some big gains. Oftentimes, those are the biggest insights my students get, are when they realize that they had been approaching a question type or section the wrong way, or approaching their study process the wrong way. And so if you're working really hard, but working inefficiently or doing something incorrect and repeating bad habits, that's obviously not good. So there's a lot we could work on there. Now, one of the biggest misconceptions I see from students is around, in logical reasoning, necessary versus sufficient assumption questions. Do you feel like you have a good handle on that? No? Okay.
I don't know. I don't know. I think I do, but I don't think I'm not really good at them. Those are
Oh, okay. Well, would you mind just explaining to me your understanding of each type?
Yeah, so there are two types. One is how my instructor taught me. One is missing assumption, and the other one is just okay, forgot. Because I
Okay.
haven't touched the LSAT in like 2 months. Shit. The other, so basically, one of them involves a lot of conditional logic. And my instructor told me that basically every time you see a conditional logic, you want to pull the logic out, and then basically you want to fill in the answer choices, whatever one you're going to pick. You're going to plug that back in, and if it fills the gap between basically the premises and the conclusion, if you can, and you plug that thing in the middle, and if it connects the premises and the conclusion all together, then that's the answer. And for missing assumption, basically the strategy was that you read the intro passage, and then you go through the answer choices, and then you negate them, and then you plug them back in, and if it goes back and negate any part of the intro passage, then that's the answer.
Okay, so just to be clear, the one with conditional statements where you're plugging it in, that's the sufficient assumption, right?
Yeah.
It is. Oh, yeah. Okay, so sufficient assumption questions, as you said, they do lend themselves to formal logic and diagramming, where you're laying out conditional statements a lot of the time. You could diagram evidence conditionals, conclusion conditionals, and then you could propose a new conditional statement in the form of a sufficient assumption. And that sufficient assumption, when combined with the evidence, will guarantee the conclusion 100%, leaving no ambiguity at all.
Yeah.
So sufficient assumption, you view the answer choices as new information. Again, when combined with the evidence, they guarantee the conclusion. Alternatively, necessary assumption questions, what you were referring to as missing assumption, which I don't love that phrase, by the way. I think it's a little bit confusing in certain regards because all assumptions are missing in a sense. But a necessary assumption is basically asking you for something that was implicit in the argument already and was required by the argument. So I think of these as a very specific kind of must be true question. And as you said, negation does work. The correct answer choice, when negated, will destroy the argument because it is required by the argument in order for the argument to work.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you talked about difficulty with logical opposites, like logical negations of answer choices. And that's a really real problem area for a lot of students, especially when it comes to negating conditional statements, which is a bit more complex to do, because in those cases, you're not actually negating the variables. You are negating the arrow itself. So a statement saying X requires Y or X only if Y, you're not negating X or Y. You're negating the only if. You're negating the requires. So if the statement in the original is X requires Y, the negation would be X does not require Y. Simple as that. So you're negating the requirement itself.
Yeah.
Now, you tell the difference between these question types based upon a key word or phrase in the question stem that is synonymous with necessity or sufficiency. So necessary assumption questions will have words and phrases in the question stem like depends upon, requires, and assumes, all synonymous with necessity. Sufficient assumption questions, on the other hand, have words and phrases that are synonymous with sufficiency, like allows, enables, properly inferred if assumed, and properly drawn if assumed. Now, I focus on this because it covers a lot of logical reasoning. Those are two fairly common question types, necessary assumption in particular, and you have to know the proper perspective from which to view the stimulus, and the question stem tells you how. And so I would want you to do several questions of each type after this conversation, and then reach out to me and let me know your articulation of the difference of each type to make sure you've really got it down. How does all of this strike you?
So So you want me to basically try out these questions with what sort of like theory or technique?
Right. So I've shared a lot of theory with you now, but you've got to put it into practice. So I would want you after this conversation to do several questions of each type, maybe 10 of each type or 20 of each type as a drill. And then I want you to reach out to me and lay out for me your understanding of the difference in how you approach each and what each is asking for to make sure you've really got it down.
Okay. Okay. I think so. Basically, the difference, that's what you've shared with me. You know, the certain keywords that differentiate the question stems with different. And then you also told me that. So basically, you want me to try the same technique that my instructor has taught me with the negation, right? And also with the sufficient assumption that if you plug it back in and if it definitely proves the conclusion, that's the theory you want me to keep in my mind and go and solve the questions, or just a little confused there?
Yeah, sure. So I've shared a bit of the theory with you, but there's also the tactical. So the tactical would be, as we said, for necessary assumption questions, negation. Now, I wouldn't want you to apply negation blindly or mechanically. I would rather that you apply it as one tool in your toolkit. So negation is just one option, but I also want you to simply ask yourself for each choice, does this need to be true? If it were not true, what would happen? And the correct choice when negated would destroy the argument, but you don't have to mechanically negate all 5 choices every single question. For sufficient assumptions, there are some common formulas underlying sufficient assumption stimuli. And I have an article on my site laying all of those out, and I'll send it to you after this conversation. And basically what I do is I lay out the most common formats for sufficient assumption questions so that you can see a stimulus and know which formula to apply. So I'd want you to look at that as well before jumping into the questions.
Okay. Okay, great.
Now, we talked about logic games a bit and making deductions, and you gave me the impression that you weren't always making all the deductions that you would have liked to or that you could have. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So you may not know, but I actually have logic games video explanations on the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel for the vast majority of logic games released this millennium. So from exam 29 and up, have you watched any of those?
No.
So if you want to learn to make more deductions, I would say watch the explanation videos because I'm laying it all out for you. And of course, my way is not the only way to approach these, but it could shed some light for you on how to solve these games more efficiently and show you a different perspective on those. Mm-hmm. So I think that would be a good starting point. And also, of course, there's redoing games. There's enormous value in redoing logic games to see them from a different perspective, maybe 3 times and then take a break, do it another time, look at explanations from a few different sources, not just mine, and then compare your results and see what you like best in terms of the style.
Okay. And how about the reading comp?
So where do you feel you're going short in reading comp? You talked about speed reading a lot. Do you feel like speed reading is really serving you?
I don't know. I'm still missing a good amount of questions.
So speed reading, I think, has some value, but it's somewhat limited. I think, of course, you want to get faster at reading, especially for the digital LSAT reading on a screen. So there are a couple of tools I recommend for this. One is called Spreeder.com, Spreeder. The other is called Phrase Reader, Prase reader.com. And what they do is they allow you to copy paste text into a field, and then you can display it to yourself at different speeds. So you can kind of put yourself on a reading comprehension treadmill to get faster. But a lot of other speed reading techniques are really about focusing on topic sentences and skimming over the details. And that has some value, but also I want you to remember that you're reading for structure, not for content. And so it's not about getting the major takeaways from the information. It's more about thinking, how is the author going about making their argument? What's their method of reasoning? What kind of evidence are they using to support their conclusions, which of course are their major viewpoints or theories or hypotheses? And I wouldn't want you to neglect the details altogether. Instead, I would want you to simply know where to find the details when you need them.
Okay. Got it.
Do you find that you're taking a more structural or viewpoint focused approach in reading comp?
I'm gonna try to from now on, but I don't think I really was.
Okay, yeah, that's something I would definitely keep in mind. And of course, inside the courses, I go into this in a lot more depth, walking through it with actual passages, laying out how I would notate them in terms of what are the viewpoints, what are the evidence, what's the evidence, who, if anyone, is advocating a particular position, and noting where all of those things are so you can find them when you need to. And another thing I walk through in the course is laying out for you the major parties in the passage, the major advocates, and summarizing them or kind of dumbing it down for myself to make it more relatable, because these are very complex, but if you can simplify it, you can really get a better handle on what it is that they're talking about.
Okay, great. Sounds good.
Awesome, Hira. Well, we're about up for today, but before we sign off, what would you say is the biggest insight you got from our call today?
I guess it's definitely with the games and with the reading comp. Reading comp, as you were telling me, I realized that I've been missing every single thing you were telling me about, structure. That wasn't the perspective, or that wasn't the mindset that I was going in with to solve the reading comp, the passages and so forth. So I'm really, really glad that, with this, I'm gonna go now and, approach the passage with a different mindset and with everything that you've outlined for me, and I will use that. And with the games, I really like your perspective that, you go and watch my videos, and if it doesn't work for you, you watch someone else's, and you try to get, you try and get to see how other people have solved the games, and you try to utilize and see which one best fits for you. And I think that's really helpful, because this way, not only are you getting an explanation from one source, but you have all this multiple perspective, and then at the end of the day, you have to make sense of which one do you think helped you most, or which one do you think, and how you can combine all of those, and what can you get away from all of the different perspectives that you have seen. So basically picking a little from here, picking a little from here and there. So that was really good. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I'm really glad to hear it. Please keep in touch and let me know if you need anything as you move forward.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.